The unexpected encounter. The night was calm aboard the United Nations space station, Sentinel-14. Captain Ryan Cole sat in his quarters, sipping his lukewarm coffee while scanning through reports on his tablet. As a seasoned soldier, he had seen his fair share of battles, but this mission was different. No combat, no firefights, just routine diplomacy between humanity and the alien species known as the Extran. He almost wished for something exciting to break the monotony. His wish was granted sooner than expected. A sharp knock echoed through his quarters, unusual at this late hour. Ryan placed his tablet down, his brow furrowing. Visitors weren't common, especially unannounced ones. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked to the door. As it slid open, he was greeted by a sight that immediately put him on edge. Standing there was Valera, the Extran ambassador. Her tall, slender frame seemed even more imposing in the dim corridor light. Her silver hair flowed like liquid metal down her back, and her golden eyes, which usually carried a calm authority, now burned with urgency. She wore a long, flowing robe adorned with the intricate patterns of her people's royal lineage. "Ambassador Valera," Ryan said, his voice steady. "This is unexpected." "Captain Cole," she replied, her voice smooth yet edged with tension. "I need to speak with you, privately." Ryan hesitated. Diplomats rarely sought out soldiers for personal conversations, especially not in the middle of the night. His instincts, honed through years of military service, told him something was wrong. But he stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. As the door slid shut behind her, Valera turned to face him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Captain, what I'm about to ask you may sound strange, but I assure you, it is of utmost importance." Ryan crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "I'm listening." Valera took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. "Earth and the Extran have maintained peace for years, but that peace is now under threat. A faction within my government is plotting something catastrophic, a weapon capable of wiping out entire planets." Ryan's eyes widened. "And you're just telling us this now? Why haven't you brought this to the council?" "I can't," Valera said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The council is compromised. Some of its members are part of this faction. If I expose them without proof, they'll turn the entire Extran fleet against Earth." Ryan's jaw tightened. "And what does this have to do with me?" Valera stepped closer, her golden eyes locking onto his. "I need your help to stop them. There's a device, an ancient relic hidden in forbidden Extran space, that can neutralize the weapon. But I can't retrieve it alone. I need someone I can trust. Someone human." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. Ryan could feel his pulse quicken. A mission into forbidden Extran space. It sounded like a suicide run. But her desperation was real, and if what she said was true, Earth itself was at risk. "Why me?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Surely you have allies among your own people." Valera looked away for a moment, her expression conflicted. "Because you are not bound by Extran politics, and because the device," she hesitated, "it requires human DNA to activate." Ryan stared at her, stunned. "Human DNA? How is that even possible?" "That's a question for another time," Valera said quickly. "Right now, the faction is already moving to deploy the weapon. We have days, maybe less, before it's too late." Ryan paced the room, his mind racing. He had been trained to make quick decisions under pressure, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. Could he trust her, or was this some elaborate trap? He stopped and turned to face her. "What happens if I say no?" Valera's expression darkened. "Then billions could die, Captain. Not just humans, but countless other species across the galaxy. You would be dooming them all." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had sworn an oath to protect humanity, and now that oath was being tested in ways he never imagined. Ryan exhaled sharply, his decision made. "Fine. I'll help you. But if this turns out to be a setup, Ambassador, you won't like the consequences. Valera's lips curled into a faint smile, though her eyes remained serious. I expected nothing less from a human. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing, Captain. Once we begin, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that? Ryan met her gaze, his resolve solidifying. I'm ready. Valera nodded and stepped out into the corridor, leaving Ryan alone with the weight of his choice. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. This mission would change everything. And somewhere deep inside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ambassador's request was only the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than he could imagine. A dangerous agreement. The sleek X-Dran vessel hummed with an alien energy that made Ryan's skin crawl. He stood at the observation deck, staring out at the endless void of stars. The faint blue glow of the ship's interior cast an otherworldly sheen on everything, making it feel like he had stepped into a dream or a nightmare. Valera entered silently, her movements as graceful as ever. But there was a tension in the air, sharper than the chill of the artificial atmosphere. She carried a metallic device, its surface etched with glowing symbols that shifted like liquid light. Captain Cole, she said, her voice softer than before. We're entering X-Dran space. I need you to be prepared. Ryan turned to face her, crossing his arms. Prepared for what? You've been vague about everything since this started. First, a secret mission, now a mysterious device. I'm risking everything here. Don't you think I deserve some answers? Valera's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of guilt in her golden eyes. She placed the device on the table between them, its glow pulsing faintly. You're right, she said, her tone measured. It's time you understood the stakes. She gestured for him to sit, and though he hesitated, Ryan finally took a seat across from her. Valera tapped the device, and a holographic map of the galaxy bloomed into existence, its edges rippling like water. This, she said, pointing to a cluster of red spheres, is the rogue faction's territory. They control key resources, ships, and most importantly, this weapon. Ryan leaned closer, studying the map. That's deep in X-Dran space. How are we supposed to get close without being detected? Valera's lips pressed into a thin line. We won't. They'll know we're coming. Ryan blinked. You're serious. You're planning to just waltz into enemy territory. There's no other choice, Valera said firmly. The weapon is nearly operational. If we delay, it will be too late. Ryan shook his head, leaning back in his chair. And this device of yours, how exactly is it supposed to stop them? Valera hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the glowing device. This is an artifact from before even my people's recorded history. It's a key, Captain. It can access and disable the rogue faction's weapon. But it requires something unique, a biological signature that only humans possess. Ryan frowned. Why humans? What's so special about us? Valera looked away, her expression unreadable. That is a long story, one I promise to explain once this is over. Ryan's gut twisted with unease. Every instinct screamed at him to back out, to refuse this insane mission. But the stakes were too high. If Valera was telling the truth, walking away wasn't an option. Before he could respond, the ship lurched violently, alarms blaring. Ryan jumped to his feet as Valera tapped her communicator. Report. She barked, her voice losing its usual calm. Ambassador, came the panicked voice of the pilot. We've been detected. Enemy vessels are closing in. 3 warships, heavily armed. Valera turned to Ryan, her expression grim. Looks like we won't have to waltz in after all. They'd brought the dance to us. Ryan grabbed a nearby handrail as the ship shook again, this time from weapons fire. Tell me this thing has shields, he shouted. Shields won't hold against their firepower for long, Valera admitted. We need to jump to the next sector. And how do you plan to do that with them breathing down our necks? Valera didn't answer. Instead, She raced to the cockpit, Ryan close behind. The Extran pilot, a nervous-looking man with silvery skin, was frantically navigating the controls. "Set course for the Heron Nebula," Valera ordered. "We can lose them there." Ryan's eyebrows shot up. The Heron Nebula. Isn't that the galactic equivalent of a death trap? Exactly, Valera said, her tone razor-sharp. "They'll think twice before following us in." As the ship jolted forward, Ryan's stomach churned. He had faced danger before, but this was insanity. And yet, as the stars outside blurred into streaks of light, he couldn't deny the surge of adrenaline coursing through him. For better or worse, he was in this now. And as the enemy ships closed in, Ryan realized there was no turning back. Not anymore. "Hold on, Captain," Valera said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This is just the beginning." The ship roared as it plunged into the nebula, the walls of gas and debris swallowing them whole. The cockpit lights flickered, and for a brief moment, everything was silent. Then the alarms started again, and Ryan knew their trouble was far from over. Secrets of the Extran. Ryan's head throbbed as he regained consciousness. The taste of blood lingered in his mouth, and the faint smell of ozone filled the air. The last thing he remembered was the ship spiraling uncontrollably after an enemy torpedo had grazed their hull. Now he was sprawled on the cold metallic floor of what appeared to be a cargo bay. Above him, Valera stood, her golden eyes scanning him with concern. She held a strange cylindrical device in one hand, its glowing symbol swirling like liquid fire. "You're awake," she said, her voice steady but tense. "Good. We don't have time to waste." Ryan sat up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. "Where are we?" "Safe for now," Valera replied. "We managed to escape the nebula, but we crash-landed on one of our old outposts. It's abandoned, but it'll shield us from scanners for a while." Ryan rubbed his temples, trying to piece things together. "And the ship?" "Unusable," she admitted. "The damage was too severe. We're stranded here until I can contact an ally for extraction." Ryan groaned. "Fantastic. Stuck on a deserted alien rock with no backup. This mission just keeps getting better." Valera crouched beside him, holding out a small metallic capsule. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." Ryan eyed the capsule warily but took it, the liquid inside tasting bitter but oddly refreshing. As the ache in his body began to subside, he looked at Valera, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "All right," he said sharply. "Enough with the cryptic answers. You dragged me into this mess, so it's time for some real explanations. Start with that thing." He pointed at the glowing device in her hand. "What is it, really?" Valera hesitated, her expression unreadable. She placed the device on the floor between them, its glow casting strange shadows on the walls. "This," she began, "is a relic from the progenitors, an ancient species that vanished long before even the Extran existed. It is the only known key to the rogue faction's superweapon." Ryan frowned. "And it just so happens to need human DNA to work. Convenient." "It's not a coincidence," Valera said quietly. "The progenitors weren't native to our galaxy. We believe they came from your world, or a version of it." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What are you saying?" "That humans are connected to these progenitors." Valera nodded slowly. "Their artifacts share similarities with human genetic markers. It's why your species has adapted so quickly to galactic technology. You're not entirely alien to it." Ryan's mind reeled at the implications. If what she was saying was true, humanity's rapid technological advancements weren't just luck. They were part of a much larger mystery. "Why didn't anyone tell us this before?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Valera's gaze hardened. "Because the Council thought it was safer to keep the truth hidden. If humanity knew the full extent of your connection to the progenitors, it could have destabilized the galaxy." Ryan laughed bitterly. So, instead, they just left us in the dark while factions like yours played God with ancient weapons. This isn't a game, Captain, Valera snapped, her calm demeanor cracking. The rogue faction isn't interested in diplomacy or balance. They want domination, and they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. Ryan stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Every fiber of his being screamed not to trust her, but her desperation felt genuine, and the stakes were too high to ignore. Before he could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. The walls vibrated, and a faint hum filled the air. Valera shot to her feet, her hand on the communicator at her waist. "They found us," she said grimly. Ryan stood, his instincts kicking in. "How?" "You said this place was off their scanners." "It is," Valera replied, her voice tight. "But the faction has their ways. They must have followed a trail from the wreckage." Ryan clenched his fists. "Great. What's the plan?" Valera grabbed the device and secured it in a protective casing. "We can't let them get their hands on this. If they capture it, everything is lost." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Then we fight." Valera arched a brow. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, Captain. Are you sure about this?" He smirked, despite the tension. "Let's just say humans are pretty good at beating the odds." As the rumbling grew louder, Valera handed him a sleek alien rifle, its surface etched with glowing runes. "Then let's hope you're right, Captain." The two of them moved to the entrance of the outpost, the dim light casting their shadows across the floor. Ryan tightened his grip on the weapon, adrenaline surging through his veins. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door burst open, and the first of the rogue faction's soldiers stormed in. Ryan raised the rifle, his finger on the trigger. "Here we go." And with that, the battle for survival began. Betrayal in the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and alien plasma. Ryan crouched behind a fallen support beam, his breathing heavy as he scanned the darkened corridors of the outpost. Valera was beside him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Her calm exterior had been replaced by a sharp edge of determination. "We can't stay here," she whispered, clutching the glowing device in her hands. "They'll corner us if we don't move." Ryan nodded, gripping the alien rifle she had given him. "Lead the way, but keep in mind, I'm not dying on this rock." They crept through the maze-like structure, the walls humming faintly as if the abandoned outpost was alive. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional distant echo of footsteps. The rogue faction soldiers were closing in, but for now, they were unseen. As they rounded a corner, Ryan grabbed Valera's arm, pulling her back into the shadows. He pointed ahead. A single soldier stood guard near an access door, his armor reflecting the dim light. Ryan held up 3 fingers, then gestured toward himself. Valera gave a subtle nod, and Ryan moved forward with practiced stealth. With one swift motion, Ryan grabbed the soldier from behind, knocking him out cold with the butt of his rifle. He gestured to Valera, who slipped past him and accessed the door's control panel. Her fingers danced across the alien interface, the door hissing open moments later. As they stepped into the next chamber, Ryan froze. The room was massive, its walls lined with glowing alien runes. At its center was a holographic display, showing a detailed schematic of the rogue faction's superweapon. Standing around it were 3 figures, rogue faction officers, and one of them was Karen, the Extran council member who had supposedly been an ally. Ryan's grip on the rifle tightened as he whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." "Xaran. He's with them." Valera's expression darkened, her jaw clenching. "I suspected he might be involved. But this confirms it." Before Ryan could respond, Xaran turned, his sharp features illuminated by the holographic glow. His eyes landed on Valera, and a cruel smile spread across his face. Well, Xaran said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The exiled princess and her human pet. How quaint." Valera stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "Xarin, this madness ends now. The weapon you're building will doom us all." Xarin chuckled, spreading his arms theatrically. "You still don't understand, do you? The galaxy doesn't need balance. It needs strength. And with this weapon, the Extran will claim our rightful place at the top." Ryan stepped beside Valera, his rifle aimed squarely at Xarin. "You talk a big game for someone hiding behind a hologram." Xarin's smile faltered for a moment before he gestured to the other officers. "Kill them." The room erupted into chaos as the officers drew their weapons. Ryan dove behind a console, returning fire with precision. Valera moved like a shadow, her alien blade slicing through the air as she engaged one of the officers in close combat. Amid the firefight, Xarin slipped toward a hidden exit. Ryan noticed and shouted, "Valera, he's getting away." She didn't hesitate. "Go. I'll hold them off." Ryan sprinted after Xarin, his boots pounding against the metallic floor. The corridor twisted and turned, but Ryan's military instincts kept him focused. He could hear Xarin's footsteps ahead, the councilman's arrogance replaced by the sound of desperation. As Ryan rounded a final corner, he found himself in a small chamber. Xarin stood near a control panel, his hand hovering over a switch. "Don't move," Ryan barked, leveling his rifle at him. Xarin smirked, his confidence returning. "You really think you can stop this, human? You're nothing more than a pawn in a game far beyond your understanding." Ryan's finger hovered over the trigger. "Try me." Xarin's smirk faded, and for the first time, Ryan saw fear in his eyes. But before Ryan could react, Xarin pressed the switch. The entire outpost shuddered as a deep, resonating hum filled the air. Ryan's communicator crackled to life. Valera's voice came through, urgent and breathless. "Ryan, he's activated the outpost's self-destruct sequence. We have minutes. Get out of there." Ryan fired, but Xarin dove behind the control panel, escaping the blast. Ryan cursed under his breath and turned, racing back toward Valera. When he reached her, she was already dispatching the last of the officers. Her expression was grim as she grabbed his arm. "We have to move. Now." Together, they ran through the collapsing corridors, the hum growing louder with each passing second. The walls began to crack, glowing fissures spreading like veins as the outpost prepared to implode. As they burst out into the open air, the outpost exploded behind them, sending a shockwave that knocked them to the ground. Ryan coughed, rolling onto his back as debris rained down around them. Valera sat up, clutching the glowing device protectively. Her face was a mixture of relief and frustration. "Xarin escaped," she said quietly. Ryan sat up, wiping soot from his face. "Yeah, but we're alive. That's something." Valera's golden eyes met his, determination burning within them. "This isn't over, Captain. We've lost a battle, but the war has just begun." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Then let's make sure we win the next one." And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of engines echoed, an enemy ship approaching. Their fight was far from over. The mission unravels. Ryan tightened his grip on the alien rifle as the barren moon's winds whipped around him, scattering fine red dust into the air. The desolate landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by jagged outcrops of rock that cast long, eerie shadows. His breathing was steady, but his mind raced. Beside him, Valera moved silently, her gaze fixed on the glowing device cradled in her arms. "This isn't just any old relic, is it?" Ryan finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Valera glanced at him, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowed her pace, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "No, it's more than a key. It's a weapon in its own right." Ryan stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean, a weapon?" Valera turned to face him fully, the howling wind tugging at her silver hair. "The progenitors didn't just leave behind tools to safeguard the galaxy. They left means to ensure their survival, even at the cost of others. This device can disable the rogue faction's superweapon, but it can also obliterate their entire fleet and anyone else caught in its radius. Ryan stared at her, his heart sinking. You didn't think that was worth mentioning before. There wasn't time, Valera said sharply. And it doesn't matter now. We don't have the luxury of choices, Captain. If we can't stop them, the galaxy burns. Ryan clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. And what happens if we use it? How many innocent lives are you willing to sacrifice for your cause? Her golden eyes softened, and for the first time, Ryan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her steely demeanor. More than I'm willing to admit. But if it comes to a choice between sacrificing a few and losing everything, I'll do what must be done. Before Ryan could respond, a distant rumble broke the tension. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Ryan instinctively dropped into a crouch, scanning the horizon. Valera's communicator crackled to life. Ambassador, we've detected rogue faction troops converging on your location. You have minutes before they reach you. Ryan swore under his breath. Minutes? That's not enough time to dig in or escape. It doesn't matter, Valera said, her voice suddenly cold and resolute. We make our stand here. Ryan straightened, his rifle at the ready. Fine. But if we're doing this, you'd better tell me everything I need to know about that device. Valera hesitated, then handed him the glowing artifact. Its surface was warm, and the shifting symbols seemed to react to his touch. It's keyed to human DNA, she explained. That's why I brought you. Only you can activate it. Ryan looked at the device, a pit forming in his stomach. Activate it to do what exactly? To destroy the weapon and disable the rogue fleet, she said carefully. But using its full power will trigger a chain reaction. It could destroy this moon, and us along with it. Ryan froze, his mind racing. You mean you've brought me here to play the martyr? Valera's expression was unreadable. It's the only way. Before Ryan could argue further, the roar of engines filled the air. A fleet of rogue faction dropships descended from the sky, their sleek forms glinting ominously in the dim light. Dust and debris swirled as the ships landed, and soldiers poured out, their weapons gleaming. Ryan's adrenaline surged as he took cover behind a jagged rock. This isn't looking good, Valera. She crouched beside him, drawing a sleek alien pistol from her belt. It never does. But that's never stopped me before. The first wave of soldiers approached, their heavy footsteps echoing across the barren terrain. Ryan aimed his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. Then, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out, amplified by a loudspeaker. Ambassador Valera, surrender the device and yourself, and we will spare the human. Ryan scoffed. Spare me? That's generous. They're bluffing, Valera said, her tone sharp. If they get this device, there won't be anyone left to spare. Ryan fired the first shot, hitting a soldier squarely in the chest. Chaos erupted as plasma bolts lit up the battlefield, and Ryan and Valera fought side by side. The rogue faction troops were relentless, their superior numbers forcing Ryan to retreat further into the rocky terrain. As they ducked behind another outcrop, Valera turned to him, urgency in her voice. Ryan, you have to activate it. Now. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. If I activate it, we die. If you don't, everyone dies. Valera shouted back. This is bigger than us. Ryan looked at the device, its symbols glowing brighter as if sensing his hesitation. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, the enemy closing in. He gritted his teeth, his mind racing. There's got to be another way. Valera grabbed his arm, her golden eyes burning with intensity. You have to trust me. We can't let them win. Ryan met her gaze, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like never before. His finger hovered over the device's activation panel as the soldiers closed in. And then the unthinkable happened. The ground beneath them shook violently as an explosion rocked the battlefield. A new ship appeared on the horizon, one Ryan didn't recognize. Its weapons opened fire on the rogue faction troops, scattering them like ants. Valera's expression shifted to one of shock and relief. "It's not over," she said, a faint smile breaking through the tension. "Reinforcements have arrived." Ryan lowered the device, his heart pounding. "Looks like we just bought some time." But deep down, he knew their hardest decisions were still ahead: sacrifice and resolve. The reinforcements that arrived had bought them a sliver of hope, but Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it was a fleeting illusion. The sleek X-Dran ship that had saved them was now hovering silently above the battlefield, its lights dimmed to avoid drawing attention from the rogue faction's orbiting fleet. Inside the ship, Ryan and Valera stood in a cramped briefing room, surrounded by glowing holographic displays of the rogue faction's superweapon. The tension was palpable, and every face in the room was shadowed with the weight of the mission ahead. Valera stepped forward, addressing the group. "We don't have much time. The rogue faction is recalibrating their weapon for a system-wide test. If they succeed, they'll unleash devastation on a scale we've never seen." Ryan crossed his arms, his voice cutting through the silence. "And we're still banking everything on this ancient device of yours." Valera nodded, her gaze steady. "It's our only option. But there's something you need to know, Captain. Activating the device won't just destroy the weapon. It will disable their entire fleet, every ship within range, including this one." A murmur rippled through the room, and Ryan felt his chest tighten. "You're saying it's a suicide mission?" Valera hesitated before answering. "Not necessarily. If we time it perfectly, there's a chance we can escape the blast radius before the device activates." "A chance," Ryan repeated, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "That's comforting." The alien pilot, a wiry X-Dran with silvery skin and sharp features, spoke up. "Captain Cole, I've calculated the odds of surviving such an escape. They're minimal." Ryan shot a glare at Valera. "You've been sitting on this the whole time." "I didn't think it would change your decision," Valera said evenly. "You've already shown you'll do whatever it takes to protect your people." Ryan exhaled sharply, pacing the room. He hated how right she was. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than the rifle slung across his back. If this fails, there's no backup plan. Valera's silence was answer enough. The room fell quiet, save for the hum of the holographic projectors. Ryan looked around, seeing the uncertainty etched on every face. These people, alien and human alike, were counting on him, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. Finally, he stopped pacing and faced Valera. "All right, let's get this over with. What do we do?" Valera stepped closer, placing the glowing device into his hands. It pulsed faintly, its shifting symbols casting soft light on his face. "You'll need to infiltrate the weapon's core and place the device at the epicenter. Once it's activated, we'll have 5 minutes to escape." Ryan raised an eyebrow. 5 minutes. You're really cutting it close. "The longer we wait, the more likely they'll stop us," Valera said. "Timing is everything." The alien pilot interjected again. "I'll keep the ship ready for extraction. But Captain Cole, if the enemy gets to you before you activate the device, we won't have a second chance." Ryan nodded grimly, his resolve solidifying. "Got it." As they prepared to leave, Valera pulled Ryan aside. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Ryan, there's something else you should know. Activating the device, it might take more than just a touch. The progenitors built it with safeguards. It may require a deeper connection." Ryan frowned. "Deeper connection? What does that mean?" Valera hesitated, her golden eyes avoiding his. "It means the device could take something from you. Your energy, your life force. It's why I couldn't do this alone. Only humans have the resilience to endure it." Ryan's chest tightened. "And if I don't endure it, the device won't work," she admitted quietly. "And the mission will fail." Ryan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She had brought him here knowing he might not make it out alive. Part of him wanted to be furious, but another part understood. The stakes were too high for sentiment. "Fine," he said after a long pause. "Let's hope I'm as resilient as you think." The ship descended silently onto the rogue faction's base, its cloaking systems holding steady against enemy scans. As Ryan stepped onto the barren surface, the device in his hands felt heavier than it had before. Valera walked beside him, her alien blade shimmering faintly in the dim light. They moved quickly through the base's outer defenses, Valera's intimate knowledge of X-strand systems guiding them past patrols and security drones. Ryan's heart pounded as they approached the weapon's core, a towering structure of twisting metal and glowing conduits. "This is it," Valera whispered, stopping just short of the final access door. "Once you're inside, you'll be on your own. I'll cover you from here." Ryan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "See you on the other side." He stepped through the door, the hum of the superweapon's power core filling his ears. The room was massive, its center dominated by a swirling vortex of energy that seemed alive. Ryan approached cautiously, the device in his hands reacting to the core's presence. As he reached the epicenter, his communicator crackled to life. Valera's voice came through, tense but steady. "Ryan, you're almost out of time. Activate it now." Ryan took a deep breath, placing the device onto a pedestal near the vortex. Its symbols flared to life, and a searing pain shot through his body as the device drew energy from him. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let go. The room began to shake violently, alarms blaring as the device synchronized with the core. Ryan's vision blurred, but he held on, his determination overpowering the pain. Finally, with a deafening roar, the device activated. The core's energy imploded, sending shockwaves through the base. Ryan stumbled backward, his body screaming in protest. "Ryan," Valera's voice cut through the chaos. "Get out of there." Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Ryan ran, the walls collapsing around him. As he reached the exit, Valera was there, pulling him onto the waiting ship. The base exploded behind them as the ship rocketed into the sky, narrowly escaping the blast. Ryan collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Valera knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "You did it," she said softly. "The weapon is gone." Ryan nodded weakly, his vision fading. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Before he could hear her answer, darkness claimed him. The boldest choice. Darkness lingered in Ryan's mind as he slowly regained consciousness. The faint hum of the ship's engines filled his ears, a reminder that he was still alive, barely. His body ached in ways he didn't think possible, and when he opened his eyes, he found Valera sitting beside him, her golden gaze steady but distant. "You're awake," she said softly, though there was no relief in her tone. Ryan tried to sit up, but his strength failed him. "What happened?" "You activated the device," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder to stop him from moving. "The rogue faction's weapon and fleet are gone. But the energy surge," her voice faltered, "it nearly killed you." Ryan closed his eyes, fragments of the mission flashing in his mind. The searing pain, the collapsing base, the overwhelming force of the device. It was a miracle he was still breathing. "So we won?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Valera hesitated before answering. "We stopped the immediate threat, but it's far from over." Her words struck him like a cold blade. He turned his head, forcing his eyes to focus on her. "What do you mean?" She stood, her posture rigid as she stared out the ship's viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before them, but her gaze seemed to pierce through the void. The rogue faction wasn't working alone. They had allies, other factions, hidden across the galaxy. They'll retaliate. Ryan let out a bitter laugh, the sound rough and weak. "So we bought ourselves some time. Great." Valera turned back to him, her expression softer now. Time is more than we had before, and your actions today have shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of. That alone might be enough to give our enemies pause." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, wincing as pain shot through his chest. "What about the device? Is it gone?" She shook her head. "It burned out, but it wasn't destroyed. The energy you unleashed locked it into a dormant state. It's safe for now." Ryan's jaw tightened. "And what happens if someone else gets their hands on it?" Valera moved closer, kneeling beside him. "That's why we can't let that happen. I've already arranged for it to be hidden somewhere no one will find it. But it means trusting someone to keep it safe." Ryan arched a brow. "Who?" "You," she said simply. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "Me? You want me to hide it? After everything it's done?" Valera nodded. "You've proven your strength, your resilience. If anyone can protect it, it's you." Ryan was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. He had just risked everything to stop the device from falling into the wrong hands, and now she was asking him to carry that burden indefinitely. "What about you?" he asked finally. "Where do you go from here?" Valera stood, her expression unreadable. "I'll return to the council and expose Charon's betrayal. The factions need to know that their own leaders were complicit in this. If I succeed, we might stand a chance of uniting against the greater threat." "And if you fail?" Ryan asked, his voice laced with concern. She looked back at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Then I'll do what I've always done. Fight." The ship's pilot interrupted their conversation, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Ambassador, we're approaching the drop point. Captain Cole's transport to Earth is ready." Valera nodded, then turned to Ryan. "This is where we part ways." Ryan pushed himself to a sitting position, ignoring the protest of his battered body. "Valera, if this doesn't work, if the galaxy turns on Earth—" "It won't," she interrupted, her tone firm. "Not after what you've done. Humanity has proven its worth, Ryan. You've proven it." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shared experiences unspoken but understood. Then, without another word, Valera extended her hand. Ryan took it, her grip firm and steady. As the ship docked with the transport vessel, Ryan stood, his steps unsteady but resolute. He paused at the airlock, turning back to Valera one last time. "Take care of yourself, Valera. The galaxy needs people like you." "And it needs people like you, Captain Cole," she replied. "Don't forget that." The airlock hissed open, and Ryan stepped through, the faint hum of the transport's engines replacing the silence. As the door closed behind him, he felt an odd sense of finality, like one chapter of his life had ended and another was just beginning. As the transport pulled away from Valera's ship, Ryan looked out the viewport. Her vessel disappeared into the stars, a solitary light in the endless void. He clenched his fists, determination surging through him. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. And no matter what came next, Ryan knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done fighting. Not yet.